say a bit about Groundwork, and I suppose the context of this is why on earth Groundwork as an organisation would get into big bidding exercises. It's all about transforming lives and places, communities in the UK, and it's about connecting regeneration and sustainable development. And there's a link clearly with the Land Restoration Trust in terms of investment in not just the people but the places and the organisations to secure social and economic and environmental regeneration. We do that in a number of ways, particularly at the moment a huge amount of work in terms of skills and jobs, providing people who would otherwise be unemployed with particularly green jobs, and hopefully therefore improving their prospects for finding work in the long term, revitalising neglected open spaces, and engaging people in that process as well, not just doing it to them, but engaging them in how that's done, particularly engaging young people who often feel disengaged from society, and generally promoting greener ways of living and working. Now, the reason Groundwork, as a number of other charities, has got involved in bidding exercises has really come about in the last few years. Traditionally, we, like other charities, got most of our income from grants. And yes, I know you have to write a bid for a grant, but for the purposes of this presentation, when I talk about bidding, I talk about competitive bidding for things like PFI contracts, PPP contracts, and government contracts of other forms. We do, however, within Groundwork, we had a long history of working with the private sector. We were set up, it links in with the Liverpool Garden Festival. We were set up by Michael Heseltine as one of the government's reactions to the inner city riots of 1981 from the severe recession then. And one of our partners at that time was Pilkington's. And we've always had within our ethos that it's the joint partnership between public, private and voluntary sector that can get things done. And then therefore it was perhaps not surprising that as some of those private sector companies, and initially it was Balfour Beatty, were putting together big PFI bids and started to find that within the criteria of those bidding exercises that aspects of sustainability started to be put in, that they came and started talking to us about how we could help them in those processes. And initially our work, the work that I was doing was very much about supporting those big private sector companies in areas such as building schools for the future, hospital regeneration, fire and rescue bids, and estates management bids. However, that work and the work that we've done internally in skilling people up to support on those external bids has then led into Groundwork taking on more of a direct bidding role itself, and with DWP's Community Task Force, which is part of the Young Person's Guarantee to get young people back to work, we became the first voluntary sector organisation to actually win a bid as a prime contractor and not just rely on the private sector people like Manpower and A4E to subcontract to us to get some work out of that scheme. I always have to ask what people mean by sustainability. Paul covered that off fairly well in the first presentation, and I would entirely accept the traditional definition of environmental, social and economic at the aspects of sustainability, and particularly the idea that we have the land, have the globe in trust for our lives, and that we must try and ensure that future generations do not suffer from the way that we use it. However, in bidding exercises, you have to be careful that the people who put the bids together, put the tenders together, have the same understanding of sustainability. In Community Task Force bidding exercise, sustainability was handled in this way: discuss your approach to corporate social responsibility, including sustainability, social issues and economic issues. And it was very clear from that what they meant by sustainability was environmental issues. But they knew they probably had to have the word sustainability in there somewhere, so they did it that way. So we had to sort of write an answer to that question, which sort of demonstrated we really did understand what sustainability meant, while answering the question pretty well in the way that they'd set it up. So just looking at those different aspects of sustainability, in terms of the environmental side of it, there are a number of things that you can do with big contracts in terms of carbon footprint reduction. I would also, under this side, look at things not just in terms of reducing the carbon footprint, but reducing resource use overall. It's a little personal hobby horse of mine that a lot of the debate around climate change at the moment has sort of got bogged down into the extent or not of how these processes are actually happening and how the research on it is happening. But actually, a lot of that is irrelevant. The big issue that comes whether or not exactly how those things play out is that the globe's resources are running out. Unless we build our infrastructure, our schools, our hospitals, our fire stations, so on and so on, in a way that will be sustainable in a world in 25 years' time where resources are much more limited, we are wasting the money, wasting the scarce capital we spend now. So showing that you can address those issues as well as addressing climate change concerns can be very important. Equally also biodiversity, using things like green roofs. Ewan mentioned that if you can increase the amount of green space in an urban area by 10%, you can effectively defer the impact of climate change over the rest of this century by reducing the heat island effect. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by putting a green roof on. And a green roof is tremendous in terms of biodiversity. And within Birmingham, there are now a number of inner city sites, city centre sites that have got some green roofs, but we need a lot more. And by factoring that into the plans you have for your hospital or whatever it might be, you can address the biodiversity and the heat island effect. And you also need to address much more local specific environmental issues. How will you keep the site clean and tidy? How will you make the green space attractive for the local community and in effect, to a certain extent, self-policing then through active use? And as I've mentioned, how will you address the heat island effect if you're building your facility, whatever it might be, in the middle of an urban area? Turning on to the social side of sustainability, it's clear that there are a number of aspects of that. I would sum them up in terms of equality and justice, both in a local and global sense of that. So a lot of businesses, for example, have recently suffered from being seen to be exploitative in terms of global fairness. They need to look at where their supply chain comes from. If you're producing your raw materials or your goods in a sweatshop in Bangladesh, you may well suffer from a consumer perspective. And increasingly, local authorities and government organisations that are tendering for these sorts of contracts want to ensure in whatever way that is not happening. And that may be about issues such as sustainable timber being used in the construction, a whole variety of things. But equally, local justice, local sustainability on this side is important as well. And one of the ways you can address the social side is just through active engagement and supporting the community. I think, as someone working for Groundwork, that makes sense in itself, because if you engage the local community, you are likely to suffer from, for example, less vandalism around your site, less crime. But equally, it is often a one-off chance when a new facility is built to address community need. Now, I've kept quiet about this so far, given the comments the other speakers have said, but I am also, in my spare time, a local politician and standing for Parliament in a capacity which a week ago I didn't think was going to lead to very much, but after the events of last week I'm suddenly thinking I might have to change my job, and you can guess which party I stand for. But one of the things that really annoyed me in the area I represent is a new primary school was built, which was great. The old primary school was falling down. It was built as a temporary facility after the Second World War and was still there in the 21st century. However, one of the really good things about the old primary school was that it was used as a community meeting point. It was used as a site where the local kids could play after school hours, and groups could get together and discuss what they wanted in what was a very deprived, what still is a very deprived housing estate. When whichever fool wrote the tender for that new primary school, and thankfully things are done better now, but they effectively wrote it in such a way that all that community use facility ended. If you want to book a room in that building after school hours, you effectively pay more than you would pay for a room in an inner city in a city centre luxury hotel. Completely crazy. Community can't afford that. What we've had to do as local councillors is to invest money in the local scout hut, bring it up to a standard where the community can meet in that building, and we've restored what was lost when the school was rebuilt. But it was a real pain and a waste of resources to have to do it. So addressing those sorts of issues with your facility are very important. Finally, looking at the economic side, and that's particularly important at the moment, and what tenderers are increasingly writing into their bids, is to look at the issues of economic regeneration that you can facilitate with your building, and clearly the big one at the moment is worklessness. How can you, for example, get young people, ex-offenders, any group such as particularly elements of the BME community that are suffering from very high worklessness back into work? So, for example, Groundwork is working with Amy, who have just won the PFI contracts in Birmingham, to look at all the highways maintenance issues, major investment, thankfully, in the roads and bridges and so on in Birmingham over the next 5 years. And that's one of the things we did, was to ensure that they can take on as many ex-offenders in that sort of work as possible. Getting an ex-offender into work is the biggest single intervention you can make to stop them re-offending. Nothing else is as effective in doing that. And so by doing that as part of their running that contract, they will have a major impact on economic and social regeneration. And clearly, if anyone's familiar with the leaky bucket theory from the New Economics Foundation, by ensuring that as much of the supply chain in your facility is as local as possible, you can help to support economic regeneration of that area, but through the multiplication of the money passing through several organisations before it dissipates out. So looking to see how you can employ local subcontractors can help as well. So a sustainable approach is all those things, but it's also about the way you do things. It's about engaging with local partners, local authorities, the voluntary community sector as you put your bid together, finding out what they think, what they want, and then putting it into the bid. It's also about educating and empowering your own staff so that they understand what all the different aspects of sustainability around your bid are, and then allowing them to influence and shape the bidding process. And finally, and I think this is very important, it's actually about walking the talk with your bidding team. So, for example, when we worked with Hayden, part of Balfour Beatty, on a bid to take over the estates management of DEFRA, there was a sustainability message that came out every day that just brought people back to what it's all about. We all measured the number of miles that we went in different forms. We all monitored our carbon footprints, and it was all just part of the culture of that bidding team. But we assessed our own sustainability because we didn't feel that we could show to DEFRA that we would run the contract in a sustainable way if we hadn't run the bid in a sustainable way. So I think that's important to see. So, thank you very much for listening.